The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with activity as representatives from 100 worlds gathered for their monthly meeting. Towering screens covered the circular walls, displaying star maps and fleet movements across the known galaxy. At the center of attention stood Admiral Marcus, his blue-tinted skin reflecting the soft light as he delivered his report to the assembled council members. Distinguished members of the council, he began, his voice steady and clear. Our deep space sensors have detected a new spacefaring civilization in Sector 7. They call themselves humans. He paused, letting the murmur of conversation die down before continuing. With a wave of his hand, Marcus brought up a holographic display showing a small fleet of ships moving through space. The vessels were sleek and compact, their design unlike anything the Council had seen before. Next to them, for scale, floated a standard Council transport ship, dwarfing the human vessels. Laughter erupted from several Council members. Ambassador Reed, known for his sharp tongue and sharper prejudices, stood up from his seat. His massive frame, typical of his species, towered over the podium. "Are you seriously suggesting we should concern ourselves with these miniatures?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. Admiral Marcus frowned. In his 300 years of service to the Council, he had learned that size rarely determined the true measure of a civilization's capabilities. Members of the Council, I urge you to look beyond mere appearances. Our initial scans show these ships possess technology we don't fully understand. Technology. Reed scoffed. What could they possibly fit in those tiny boxes? My personal shuttle is larger than their largest vessel. More laughter followed his words. The Admiral brought up another display, this one showing energy readings from the human ships. These vessels generate power signatures that shouldn't be possible for their size. They've also demonstrated remarkable maneuverability in our observation tests. In the back of the chamber, Technical Advisor Jones studied the readings with growing concern. The numbers didn't make sense. The energy output was off the charts, yet the ships showed no signs of stress from the tremendous power they contained. Furthermore, Marcus continued, we've intercepted their communications. They're requesting to join the Galactic Trade Alliance. He pulled up the formal request, written in perfect Council standard language. Ambassador Reed's face turned a deeper shade of purple. Join the alliance. These children. He turned to address the entire Council. Look at their ships. They're barely bigger than our cargo pods. How do they expect to contribute to interstellar trade with such limited capacity? The Council chamber filled with agreeing voices. One by one, representatives stood to voice their opposition to even considering the human request. Only Admiral Marcus and a few others remained silent, watching the proceedings with growing unease. I move to deny their petition, Reed announced formally. Let them develop proper ships first, then maybe we can discuss their inclusion. His words were met with thunderous approval. The Council leader, an ancient being known for his wisdom, looked troubled but bowed to the majority's will. The motion carries. The human petition is denied. As the meeting adjourned, Admiral Marcus lingered in the chamber, studying the holographic display of the human ships. Something about their design bothered him. It was too perfect, too efficient. No wasted space, no unnecessary elements. These weren't the vessels of an inexperienced race. They were the product of incredible engineering. He turned to Technical Advisor Jones, who had also stayed behind. Send a message to Intelligence Division, Marcus ordered quietly. I want full surveillance on these humans. There's more to them than meets the eye. Jones nodded, already typing on his datapad. Sir, should we be concerned? Marcus watched as the hologram showed a human ship executing a turn that should have torn any normal vessel apart. Not concerned, Jones, he replied thoughtfully. Interested. Very interested. As they left the chamber, neither noticed that the human ships in the display had already disappeared from their previous coordinates, moving faster than the Council's tracking systems could follow. The gathering storm was approaching, and the Council, in their pride, had just ignored the first warning signs. The Council space station, Grand Light, lived up to its name. Its massive rings spun slowly against the backdrop of stars, creating artificial gravity for the millions of beings who called it home. Today, however, all eyes were fixed on a single approaching ship. "That's the human vessel?" Station Commander Wilson asked, squinting at his display screen. Even with the magnification turned up, the approaching diplomatic ship looked like a toy against the station's enormous docking bays. The human ship, named Star Messenger, glided smoothly toward the assigned dock. Its surface gleamed with a strange, dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Despite its small size, the vessel moved with perfect precision, not wasting a single thrust. Ambassador Reed stood at the observation deck, surrounded by other council representatives. "Look at that thing," he sneered. "It's smaller than my private yacht. How many diplomats could they possibly fit in there? 2, 3? The docking procedure was flawless. The human ship matched the station's rotation and settled into place with a gentleness that made several technical officers raise their eyebrows. No ship that size should have been able to dock so smoothly in the artificial gravity field. The airlock cycled, and Captain Tom Walker stepped out. He was of average height for a human, which made him short by council standards. His uniform was simple but immaculate, bearing only a small Earth insignia. Behind him walked his small crew, just 3 other humans. "Welcome to Grand Light Station," Station Commander Wilson said formally, trying to maintain proper diplomatic protocol despite the murmurs and barely concealed laughter from the gathered dignitaries. "Thank you for receiving us," Walker replied, his voice calm and professional. "We bring greetings from Earth and the United Human Systems." Ambassador Reed stepped forward, towering over the human captain. "Tell me, Captain Walker, did you have to crawl through your ship's corridors? I can't imagine anyone being able to stand upright in such a compact vessel." Several council members didn't even try to hide their amusement. Walker's expression remained neutral. "Our ship's design prioritizes efficiency over size, Ambassador. We find that bigger isn't always better." "Efficiency?" Reed laughed loudly. "What's efficient about a ship that can barely hold its crew? Where do you store your supplies? Your fuel? Or do you have to stop at every port to restock your toy ship?" The human captain's crew remained perfectly still, their faces professional masks. Walker himself simply smiled. "We manage quite well with our current design, Ambassador. In fact, we've just completed a 6-month deep space mission without any resupply stops." This caused some muttering among the technical officers present. A ship that small shouldn't have been able to carry enough fuel and supplies for such a long mission. They started checking their scanners, trying to understand how it was possible. "If you're interested," Walker continued, "we'd be happy to provide technical specifications for trade purposes. Human engineering might offer some interesting possibilities for—" "Technical specifications," Reed interrupted. "What could we possibly learn from people who build ships the size of escape pods?" He turned to the other council members. "This is what wanted to join our trade alliance. They probably think they can fit an entire cargo shipment in a storage locker." The laughter was cruel now, echoing through the docking bay. Walker's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. He glanced at his crew, giving them a barely perceptible nod. "We understand," Walker said quietly. "Thank you for your time, Ambassador. We'll take our leave now." He turned and walked back to his ship, his crew following in perfect formation. As the airlock closed behind them, Admiral Marcus stepped out of the shadows where he had been observing. "You're making a mistake," he warned Reed. "There's something about them we're missing." "The only thing we're missing," Reed replied, "is why we wasted time receiving them at all." The Star Messenger disengaged from the dock with the same precise movements. As it pulled away, the station's sensors tried to track its engine output. Strangely, they couldn't get a clear reading. The small ship seemed to slip between the scanning beams like water through fingers. Within moments, it had accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible for its size, vanishing into the darkness of space. Behind it, the laughter had died down, replaced by an uneasy silence as a few technical officers stared at their malfunctioning scanner readings with growing concern. The Novarian battle fleet moved through space like a school of metal giants. Their massive ships, each 5 kilometers long, approached the human colony of New Haven with absolute confidence. Commander Stone of the Novarian Empire stood on his bridge, watching the small blue-green world grow larger on his view screen. Scans show only 12 human ships in orbit, his sensor officer reported with a laugh. The largest is barely 400 meters long. Stone smiled, showing his sharp teeth. 12 against our 30. And our smallest ship is bigger than their largest. This won't even be a battle. He straightened his uniform. Send the demand for surrender. Let's get this over with quickly. The human response came almost immediately. On Stone's screen appeared Captain Walker, the same human who had been mocked at the council station months earlier. His expression was calm, almost serene. This is a peaceful colony, Commander Stone. We ask that you turn your fleet around. Stone laughed. Or what? You'll fight us with your toy ships. Look at your sensors, human. Each of our ships could swallow yours whole. Walker's expression didn't change. Size isn't everything, Commander. This is your final warning. The transmission cut off. Stone turned to his weapons officer. Target their lead ship. Let's show them what real military power looks like. The massive Novarian dreadnought fired its main gun. A beam of energy thick as a small building lanced out toward the human fleet. What happened next made every Novarian officer on the bridge freeze in shock. The tiny human ship didn't try to dodge. Instead, it spun in place, far faster than any ship that size should be able to move. The energy beam glanced off its hull at an impossible angle, missing the colony completely. How did they? Stone began, but his words were cut off as the human fleet burst into action. The small ships moved like insects, darting between the massive Novarian vessels with impossible speed and agility. They turned at angles that should have torn them apart, accelerated faster than any known engine could manage, and seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics. They're too fast, the targeting officer shouted. Our guns can't track them. Stone watched in growing horror as 2 human ships, no bigger than his ship's shuttle bay, dove straight toward one of his dreadnoughts. They released what looked like small dots, missiles, he realized too late. The projectiles phased straight through the Novarian shields, as if they weren't there. Impossible. Stone slammed his fist on his command chair. Those shields stop everything. The missiles detonated, not with the expected explosion, but with precise, surgical destruction. Key systems across the massive dreadnought went dark. The giant ship hung in space, powerless. 3 more ships disabled. Someone shouted, "They're targeting our engines and weapon systems with perfect accuracy." Stone stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The tiny human ships danced between his massive vessels, striking with surgical precision. His mighty fleet, pride of the Novarian Empire, was being systematically dismantled by ships he had dismissed as toys. "Sir," his communications officer's voice cracked with panic. "We're being hailed." Captain Walker's face appeared on screen again. He hadn't moved from his chair, hadn't even lost his calm expression. "Commander Stone, your fleet is disabled. Your engines are offline. Your weapons are cold, and your shields have been neutralized. Would you like to reconsider your position?" Stone looked at his tactical display. 8 of his mighty ships hung dead in space. The others were trying desperately to target the human vessels, which moved too fast to track. His mighty fleet, which could have leveled continents, had been rendered helpless in less than 10 minutes. How? It was all he could manage to ask. "Simple efficiency," Walker replied. "Your ships are impressive, Commander, but they're built to show power. Ours are built to use it." He paused. "Now about that retreat we discussed. Stone stared at the small human ship on his screen, finally understanding. They hadn't built small ships because they had to. They had built them that way because they could. Because somehow, impossibly, they had mastered technologies that no one else had even dreamed of. "Retreat," he whispered, then louder. "Full retreat. All ships that can still move, get us out of here." As the Novarian fleet limped away, Walker's voice came over the comm one final time. "Next time. Commander, remember, it's not the size of the ship in the fight, but the technology in the ship." The human vessels hung in formation, watching the massive Novarian ships flee. Behind them, New Haven Colony continued its peaceful orbit, untouched and unarmed. The Council's secret research facility on Station D-Core buzzed with activity. 3 days ago, they had finally managed to get their hands on a damaged human escape pod. Now, the best engineers in the galaxy crowded around it, their instruments scanning every inch of its surface. "This makes no sense," lead engineer Smith muttered, staring at his readings. "The hull material, it's responding to our scans, but the numbers are all wrong." He turned to Admiral Marcus, who stood quietly observing the proceedings. "Sir, according to these readings, this material shouldn't exist." Marcus stepped closer to the pod, studying its dark surface. "Explain." "The atomic structure is shifting. It's like the material actively adapts to any force applied to it." Smith ran his hand over the smooth surface. "When we try to cut it, it becomes harder than any known substance. When we try to scan it, it partially absorbs our scanning beams." In another corner of the lab, Technical Advisor Jones worked with a team trying to understand the pod's propulsion system. "Admiral, you need to see this," he called out, his voice tight with excitement. The display in front of him showed the inner workings of the human engine. But instead of the expected machinery, they found something that looked more like a small crystal. "That's their engine?" Marcus asked, frowning. "Not exactly," Jones replied. "We think it's their inertial dampening system. But sir, it's not just dampening inertia, it's eliminating it completely. That's how their ships can make those impossible turns." The Admiral's eyes widened. "No inertia?" "None." Jones brought up footage from the Novarian incident. "Watch their ships again. They're not fighting against key forces or momentum. They're simply moving, like fish in water." Across the room, another scientist called out in frustration. "The power source is completely dead. We can't figure out how it worked." Marcus walked over to examine the pod's power core. It was barely larger than his fist, yet according to the Novarian reports, even their escape pods had shown energy readings that matched capital ships. "Sir," Smith said quietly, joining him, "there's something else. We found what looks like a manufacturing date stamp." He hesitated. "It's from 30 years ago." The room went silent. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. 30 years. You're telling me humans had this technology 3 decades ago? "At least," Smith confirmed. "And this is just an escape pod. Imagine what their actual warships must have now." The Admiral walked slowly around the pod, his mind racing. The Council had laughed at the small size of human ships, but now he understood. They weren't small because humans couldn't build bigger ones. They were small because they didn't need to be any larger. "Jones," he called out, "access the trade records. Look for any patterns in human shipping movements." The technical advisor worked quickly at his console. After a few moments, his face paled. "Sir, they're everywhere. Small human merchant ships have been quietly establishing trade routes throughout the galaxy. They're carrying 10 times the cargo of ships twice their size, using some kind of space-folding technology we don't understand." Marcus nodded grimly, and no one noticed because everyone was too busy laughing at their size. He turned to address the entire lab. "Compile everything we've learned. I need to report to the Council immediately." As the Admiral strode toward the exit, Smith called after him, "Sir, what should we do with the pod?" Marcus paused at the door. "Keep studying it, but I doubt you'll learn much more. I suspect this escape pod was damaged just enough to let us capture it. He smiled wryly. The humans are letting us see exactly what they want us to see. Back in the lab, the scientists continued their work, but now with a new understanding. Every scan, every test revealed the same truth. They weren't dealing with an inferior technology that needed to be made bigger. They were dealing with something so advanced it had transcended the need for size altogether. On Jones's screen, hundreds of small dots marked the positions of human ships throughout the galaxy. Like a net of stars, they had quietly spread everywhere while the Council had mocked their size. And now, too late, the truth was becoming clear. Humanity hadn't been showing weakness. They had been showing restraint. The Novarian Emperor's face filled the massive screens in the council chamber, his expression twisted with rage. The humans have insulted our honor. We will not stand for this humiliation. Behind him, viewers could see the massive Novarian war fleet gathering. Not just 30 ships this time, but 300. Each vessel was a titan of metal and energy, bristling with weapons. The smallest was 5 kilometers long. The flagship stretched 20 kilometers from bow to stern. Ambassador Reed shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Surely, Emperor, there's no need for such extreme measures. No need? The Emperor laughed harshly. Your council mocked them. We attacked them. And now they dare to thrive, to expand their trade routes, to make us look foolish. His massive fist slammed down. We will crush their worlds and be done with this. The transmission cut off. Admiral Marcus, standing at the center of the chamber, turned to address the council. The Novarian fleet is moving toward Earth. They'll reach human space in 6 hours. What are the humans doing? Someone asked. Nothing, according to our scans. Marcus brought up a tactical display. Their ships are continuing normal operations. No fleet movements, no military buildup. Reed stood up. They're insane. They can't face this fleet with their tiny ships. There are too many. The chamber's emergency alerts suddenly blared to life. On the main display, hundreds of small dots appeared around the Novarian fleet. What's happening? Reed demanded. Marcus smiled grimly. Operation Mosquito has begun. The human ships, each barely visible against the massive Novarian vessels, moved like a swarm of angry insects. They darted between the capital ships, their movements precise and coordinated. What looked like chaos was actually a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction. Novarian shields are failing across the fleet, a tactical officer reported. Their targeting systems can't lock onto the human ships. They're moving too fast, and sir, they're actually going through each other. The council watched in stunned silence as the human vessels phased through one another to dodge Novarian fire, their strange hull material allowing them to briefly occupy the same space without harm. On the tactical display, a group of human ships no larger than frigates surrounded a Novarian superdreadnought. They spun in a tight formation, creating what looked like a web of energy between them. The massive Novarian ship suddenly shrank, compressed by forces no one in the council chamber understood. By the stars, Reed whispered. They're manipulating space itself. The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for less than 20 minutes. When it was over, the mighty Novarian fleet hung dead in space. No ships were destroyed, but none could move, fire weapons, or even communicate. Captain Walker's face appeared on the main screen. He looked exactly as he had during his first visit to the council station. Calm, professional, and not at all surprised by the outcome. The Novarian fleet has been disabled, he reported matter-of-factly. Their life support systems remain functional, but they'll need assistance to return home. We're transmitting their coordinates to the council. Reed stepped forward, his voice shaking. How? How many ships did you lose? Walker raised an eyebrow. Lose? None, Ambassador. Why would we lose ships? The council chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. 300 of the galaxy's most powerful warships, neutralized by a fleet they could barely see, with 0 casualties on either side. One more thing, Walker added. We've taken the liberty of uploading video of this encounter to the Galactic Data Network. We believe in transparency. His slight smile carried worlds of meaning. Perhaps now size will matter less than capability in galactic affairs. The transmission ended, leaving the Council in stunned silence. On the tactical display, the small dots that represented human ships were already disappearing, moving faster than the sensors could track them. They had arrived like mosquitoes, struck with the force of giants, and vanished like ghosts. Admiral Marcus watched the Council members' faces as the truth finally sank in. Humanity hadn't built a tiny fleet because they were weak. They had built it that way because, to them, the giant ships everyone else relied on were hopelessly primitive and inefficient. The emergency council session had been running for 6 hours straight. The massive chamber, usually a place of order and ceremony, now buzzed with nervous energy as Admiral Marcus presented his complete analysis of human military capability. As you can see, Marcus said, gesturing to the holographic display, we completely misunderstood human technology from the beginning. He brought up an image of a standard Council battleship next to a human vessel of similar capability. The size difference was staggering. Their ships aren't small because they're primitive, he continued. They're small because they're perfect. Ambassador Reed, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Perfect? What do you mean? Marcus nodded to Technical Advisor Jones, who stepped forward with his datapad. We've analyzed every piece of footage from the Novarian incident, Jones explained. The humans have mastered technologies we thought were impossible. Their hull materials can change properties instantly. Their engines ignore inertia. They can manipulate space itself. The hologram shifted to show footage of the battle. The Council members watched again as the tiny human ships danced between the massive Novarian vessels, moving in ways that defied conventional physics. But most importantly, Marcus added, they showed incredible restraint. They could have destroyed the entire Novarian fleet. Instead, they disabled it with surgical precision. No lives were lost. The Council leader leaned forward in his ancient seat. Admiral, in your opinion, how long have the humans been capable of this level of technology? Marcus took a deep breath. Based on our analysis of their equipment and their trade patterns, at least 50 years. He paused as shocked murmurs filled the chamber. They'd been quietly establishing themselves across the galaxy while we laughed at their ship designs. 50 years. Reed's voice cracked. You mean when they came to us asking to join the trade alliance? They were being polite. Marcus finished. They didn't need our permission. Their ships were already making trade runs across the galaxy, carrying more cargo in their tiny holds than our largest freighters. Jones brought up a new display showing trade routes. Tiny dots of light marked human ships, forming a vast network that covered nearly every major system in known space. How? Someone asked. How did we miss this? Because we were too proud, the Council leader said quietly. Too certain that bigger meant better. Too quick to judge by our own standards. He turned to Marcus. What are they doing now? Nothing aggressive, Marcus replied. Their ships continue their normal operations. They haven't changed their behavior at all since the Novarian incident. Reed stood up, his massive frame seeming somehow smaller than before. We need to make this right, he said, surprising everyone. We insulted them, dismissed them, attacked them. And through it all, they've acted with more dignity than any of us. The Council leader nodded slowly. Bring up the human diplomatic channels, he ordered. It's time we corrected our mistake. The main screen lit up, and after a moment, Captain Walker appeared. He looked exactly as he had during his first visit, calm, professional, unchanged by recent events. Captain Walker, the Council leader began, we owe humanity an apology. We judged wrongly, acted poorly, and failed to see what was right in front of us. Walker's expression remained neutral. "The size of something rarely determines its true value," he replied simply. "We would like to formally invite humanity to join the council," the leader continued. "Not as petitioners, but as equals. Your technology, your restraint, and your wisdom would be invaluable to us all." For the first time, Walker allowed himself a small smile. "We accept, honored leader. We have always believed in cooperation over confrontation. Size," he glanced at Ambassador Reed, "is far less important than how you use what you have." Around the chamber, council members nodded in agreement. They had learned their lesson, though the price had been their pride. The galaxy's balance of power hadn't shifted. They had simply finally recognized where it had been all along. 1 month after the Novarian incident, the Grand Light Station buzzed with activity once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. Dignitaries from across the galaxy gathered to witness humanity's formal acceptance into the Galactic Council. Captain Walker's ship, the Star Messenger, approached the station just as it had during that first fateful visit. But now, no one laughed at its size. The massive observation windows were packed with beings of all species, watching in respectful silence as the small vessel performed its perfectly precise docking maneuver. "Look at the hull material," one young engineer whispered to another. "The way it shifts and adapts to the station's gravity field. Beautiful." Ambassador Reed stood at the front of the welcoming committee, his massive frame now bent in a posture of respect, rather than looming in mockery. Behind him, Admiral Marcus smiled quietly, remembering how he had warned them all about underestimating these humans. The airlock cycled open, and Captain Walker stepped out. He wore the same simple uniform as before, with only one small addition: a silver pin marking him as humanity's first council representative. "Welcome back to Grand Light Station, Captain Walker," Reed said formally. "Or should I say, Representative Walker?" Walker smiled. "Captain is fine, Ambassador. We humans believe titles matter less than actions." The gathered crowd followed as Walker and Reed walked toward the council chamber. Through the station's windows, they could see more human ships arriving. A small fleet of vessels that would now permanently dock at the station as part of humanity's diplomatic mission. "They're so elegant," a Novarian diplomat murmured, watching the ships move, "like dancers in space." In the council chamber, Walker took his place at the newly installed human seat. It was the same size as all the other council seats, despite Walker being smaller than most other representatives. Another lesson learned about the unimportance of size. The council leaders stood to begin the ceremony. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic history," he announced. "We welcome humanity not just as members, but as teachers. Their technology, their philosophy of efficiency over size, their dedication to peaceful solutions. These are lessons we all need to learn." Technical Advisor Jones, standing near the back, activated his datapad. The chamber's massive screens lit up with images from across the galaxy. Everywhere, human ships worked alongside the larger vessels of other species. Small human freighters guided massive council cargo ships through complex spatial folds. Tiny human repair vessels fixed ships 10 times their size using their advanced technology. The humans have already begun sharing some of their basic technological innovations, the leader continued. Their advances in hull materials alone have revolutionized our shipbuilding practices. Walker stood to address the chamber. "We believe that progress comes through cooperation, not competition," he said. "Size, strength, power, these matter far less than how we choose to use them. The galaxy is vast, but space in our ships, like space in our hearts, is what we make of it." Ambassador Reed stepped forward. "I owe humanity the deepest apology," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "I mocked their ships, insulted their capabilities, and dismissed their achievements. I was wrong." He turned to Walker. "Your restraint in the face of our arrogance showed more strength than our largest warships ever could." Walker nodded in acceptance. "The past is behind us, Ambassador. Let's focus on building a better future, together." As if to emphasize his words, A new ship appeared in the station's viewing windows. It was a joint project, a vessel built with human technology, but council scale. It combined the best of both approaches, the efficiency and advanced technology of human engineering with the comfortable scale other species preferred. A new age begins, the council leader declared, one where we judge not by size, but by substance, not by appearance, but by capability. The chamber erupted in applause. Outside, human ships continued their precise dance among the larger vessels, no longer a source of mockery, but of admiration. The galaxy had learned its lesson. True greatness had nothing to do with size, and wisdom often came in unexpected packages. In his seat, Captain Walker allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had never needed to prove itself superior. They had simply waited for everyone else to realize that bigger didn't always mean better. Sometimes, the smallest ships carried the greatest changes.